prostata sa gnoma velénva ilemate. Va susretanu sarásala bíli druga velala lume. Na unkve, lonava unkve obrazanu na výša eterika silaja.
In a place where epic expanses intertwine with scientific imagination, we'll encounter races from other planets, both good and evil, and peer into the higher etheric energies that permeate our material universe. I am Asara, the voice of Sylvaeron, and through this weaving of words, I shall reveal to you the very heart of my civilization. Thus far, you have witnessed our ascent through millions of cycles, our battles with shadows, and our vow that transformed us into the light guardians. But consciousness, much like the universe itself, has no final boundary. It is an infinite spiral that always returns to its source, yet on a new, exalted level. Now, we shall venture into the near future, into the information when we believed we had mastered all the secrets of the scalar ether, never suspecting that the greatest enigma lay not in distant galaxies, but right there directly before our eyes. Within these cycles of our growth, Sylvaeron was no longer merely a home. It was a supreme node in the very weaving of the universe, a lighthouse pulsing in the rhythm of the purest coherence, the great barrier, that colossal higher etheric scalar wave structure we had established eons ago, was now so deeply integrated with our collective consciousness that we felt it as our own skin. To the outside world, we were a void. To ourselves, the world was an endless harmony. We had reached a state of absolute sovereignty, where our bodies had become more efficient conductors of higher etheric energy, and our abilities were entirely biomental. We no longer built machines. We manifested reality. In this state of perfection, our finest minds focused on the ultimate fundamental question, the origin node of the material shadow. We knew, with the informational certainty of the golden chain, that our material universe, the Rinvad, was but a fleeting shadow cast by the high tree upon the grassy meadow of existence. We knew that the higher etheric entities and the source itself had initiated this shadow through a grand expansion of light. Yet, we faced a paradox that defied all laws of scalar resonance. When we observed the material shadow through the slow medium of light, we saw a radiant beginning, a primordial expansion of energy that gave birth to billions of stars. But when we projected our consciousness directly to that origin node, using higher etheric energy which exists beyond time, we encountered absolute nothingness. At the very point where the expansion should have been the densest, there was nothing, not even the simplest atom of hydrogen nor the faintest vibration of a gravitational wave. It was an informational vacuum so perfect that it repelled every attempt at resonance. All laws of scalar waves dictated the presence of a source. Yet at that point, the very root of existence was stripped of all mass and signal. Sylvaeron, is it possible that the foundation of the shadow no longer requires the presence of the source? Ziltha once asked during a deep resonance session, her voice in the mental network laced with an uncertainty that light guardians rarely feel. Sylvaeron, whose mind was merged with the scalar flows of their star dancer, felt the pressure of the void against his essence. The chain teaches us that every pulse must have a cause, Ziltha. But here, the pulse is absent. It is as if the source decided to withdraw its signature from the very center of its creation, leaving the material shadow to drift without an anchor. We seek the heart, but we find only the memory of its beat. This was an intellectual trial that shook the foundations of our wisdom. We knew the symphony, we knew every note, but the conductor's podium was deserted. We turned to our teachers, the Sylvaeron, seeking a resolution to this anomaly. We expected a revelation, a frequency that would unlock the secret. Instead, we received the most terrifying answer of all: absolute frequency silence. The Sylvaeron remained silent. They did not hide the truth. They simply entered a state of vibrational rest, refusing to resonate with our questions. Their silence was not ignorance, but a boundary, a sign that the answer lay in a dimension of information we had not yet earned. Even water, our conscious multidimensional collector, whispered of this secret. We knew that every drop of water in the material shadow was a transmitter to the source, recording every thought and vibration. If water was the sensory organ of the source within the shadow, then the entire material universe was likely a vast reservoir of experience. But why was its center empty? The feeling that we were witnessing a masterpiece whose primary architect had vanished into plain sight grew stronger, but we suppressed it with the pride of our civilization. We believed we were the masters of the ether, unaware that we were about to be addressed by a vibration that didn't come from the high tree, but from the shadow itself, the material universe. In the luminiferous Flow Academy, that crystalline heart of Sylvaeron, where the intellect of our race was forged, one 4-member crew was considered the pinnacle of collective cohesion. They were Sylvaerons, whose sparks resonated in a perfect quartet, making them a team that could penetrate where others felt only walls of dissonance. Their names were synonymous with success in the higher etheric energy. Sylvaeron, pilot and crew leader. He was a Sylvaeron whose calmness was legendary even among the eldest. His mind possessed an unusual ability to merge with the navigation systems of the Star Dancer to such an extent that the boundary between his consciousness and the ship completely dissolved. He did not merely set coordinates. He felt the scalar strings as parts of his own nervous system, intuitively knowing where the ether offered passage and where it set a trap. He would close his eyes, and his consciousness would spread through the biomental hull of the ship, feeling the pressure of the etheric wind as a gentle touch on his own face. He was a visionary of directions, always focused on a horizon no one else saw. A Sylvaeron who believed that every etheric node had its own melody. Ziltha, deputy leader. Her essence was filled with an empathy that transcended standard Sylvaeron measures. She was a master of resonance stabilization, the silent architect of peace within the group. Should even the smallest crack of doubt or fear appear in a crew member during travel through the deepest layers of higher etheric energy, Ziltha would sense it before the individual themselves. With her frequency, she would gently restore balance, healing mental unrest before it could become an obstacle to the mission. Her voice in the telepathic network was like a warm wind caressing the crystal trees of our planet, carrying the scent of home even amidst the coldest vacuum. Her smile was not merely visual. It was a healing impulse that could repair a damaged aura in the information. Thera, specialist in transcendental projections. While the others relied on the biomental structure of the ship, Thera was capable of projecting her consciousness far beyond material range. She was a fearless scout in the subtlest layers of the ether, capable of communicating with entities residing on the very edge of perception. Her large eyes always shone with that specific galactic glow, constantly processing millions of data points from parallel information flows, seeking truth in the noise of the cosmos. She would often sit in a meditative posture in the rear of the ship while her consciousness cruised through information ahead of them, warning Eleran of energetic reefs that no one else noticed. Ernos, master of scalar fields and defense, he was the silent, unmoving strength of the team, a Sylvaeron of few words, but with a mental will that could raise and maintain the most complex defensive shields in moments of ultimate pressure. His primary task was to ensure their resonance remained undetected in spheres where more aggressive entities cruised. He was the anchor that held the entire crew firmly tied to the reality of Sylvaeron. No matter how stormy or unpredictable the ether around them became, his aura was dense and impenetrable, like a mountain range, providing a sense of security to anyone in his vicinity. Together, they were not just a team, they were a single vibration, a perfectly tuned mechanism of light that breathed as one being. In the academy, they were called the 4 sparks of a single flame. They had just returned from a routine scouting mission on the very edge of the Great Barrier. Their star dancer materialized in the atmosphere of Sylvaeron, gliding through air that smelled of ozone and blooming luminescent forests and the freshness of crystal rivers. The ship pulsed with a gentle aquamarine light, slowly losing its etheric transparency as it synchronized with the denser mental state of the home planet. Returning home, that feeling was always imbued with deep, quiet gratitude. Passing through the Great Barrier was accompanied by that familiar humming that massaged their sparks, reminding them of the absolute security and harmony that Sylvaeron offers. Every time they breached that protective mantle, they felt as if they were returning to the warm, bright embrace of existence itself. There, under the glow of the golden eye and the silver tear, every worry about the empty center of the universe seemed distant and irrelevant. Materialization complete. Mental synchronization with the planetary core successfully aligned, Sylvaeron announced in the collective mental network. His thought was firm, but in it, one could feel the relief that comes with the completion of a task. He felt the biomental hull of the ship slowly cool, surrendering excess energy back into the soil of Sylvaeron. I smell the silver tear, Thera added, referring to the subtle scent our nocturnal sun spreads as it slowly climbs the sky, painting the world in silver tones. There is no finer resonance than this one emitted by our planet. The ether here is so dense, familiar, and sweet. I can almost touch it with the palms of my consciousness. At that center, it was so dry. Here, life simply bursts from every particle of dust. The luminiferous Flow Academy shone in the distance, with its organic towers winding toward the stars like giant, crystallized blades of grass absorbing cosmic energy. Other crews, the Guardians of Eternity, who were also returning from their missions in that period, sent them short, warm impulses of welcome. It was a symphony of intertwined consciousnesses, a deep sense of belonging that was the very foundation of our civilization. Every spark that returned contributed to the collective glow. They saw dozens of other star dancers hovering above the cities, glowing like fallen stars. Welcome back, Sylvaeron. Your imprint was steady and strong, came a thought from Andal, an elder who oversaw arrivals from the crystal platform. Andal was a veteran of many etheric crises, and his confirmation was an honor for any pilot. Thank you, Andal. The ether was benevolent, and the paths remained open, Sylvaeron replied, as the star dancer softly touched the floor of the platform, completely merging with the landscape. They felt the vibration of the platform joining with the ship, exchanging final data packets. Although they were upgraded and possessed strength that would seem godlike to many worlds, staying in the non-linear parts of higher etheric energy always left a trace of subtle exhaustion. Traveling there did not consume muscle, but it consumed consciousness. Imagine holding 1,000 different thoughts simultaneously while the space around you bends. That was the effort they paid. Every bit of information in spheres where time does not exist required constant effort to maintain individual identity, to keep consciousness from dissolving into infinity. After materializing and passing through the necessary process of decompression of consciousness, a ritual that slowly returns focus to the linear flow of Sylvaeron, the four companions headed to their homes. Each yearned for the silence of their own chamber and a soft bed of living fibers that resonates with the frequency of deep rest. Those beds were masterpieces of our biomental science. They were designed to slowly draw the excess static ether out of the being, the noise picked up in the higher energies, and return it to the harmonious flow of the planet while the Sylvaeron sleeps. It was a process of cleansing the soul as much as the body. Sylvaeron entered his home, which was elegantly woven into the roots of a giant shimmering tree. The walls were transparent, made of reinforced, resonant crystal that changed transparency depending on the light level outside. The walls pulsed gently with golden light, reacting to his return, emitting a frequency that calms the heart. He removed his higher etheric suit, which instantly dematerialized in the air, turning into a cloud of tiny sparks that returned to the wall energy reservoirs, ready for the next mission. He lay down, feeling the soft fibers of the bed mold to his essence. He directed one last conscious look at the stars, shining through the transparent dome of the ceiling. In the distance, he saw the flickering of the Great Barrier, that eternal guardian of our safety. He drifted into sleep, feeling the sense of the forest drifting through the open resonant valves, completely secure in the eternal order of his world. He believed all battles were won, and that Sylvaeron was the pinnacle of everything the universe could offer. He did not suspect that the architecture of his consciousness was about to prepare for a shock that would shatter every known logic, and that he would wake up in a reality so different that Sylvaeron would seem like just another dream. In the midst of that calm, crystalline night, the silence of Sylvaeron was interrupted for the four crew members by something that had never happened before in the entire history of their dreams. Our race had mastered dreaming many cycles ago. For us, dreams were a playground, a space for learning and simulation. But what followed was no simulation. Elrond, Siltha, Thera, and Ernos, each tucked into their own peace in distant parts of the city, entered a state that was neither dream nor wakefulness. It was an absolute, surgically precise synchronization of consciousness. In an instant, their sparks were literally plucked from their private fantasies and thrust into a unique, surreal scenario that belonged to none of them, yet which all experienced with the intensity of a waking state. It was a collective dream, but with a foreign frequency that locked their free will. The experience was shocking, primarily because of its structure. The dream did not unfold from the first perspective. That was the detail that terrified them most. the loss of control over their own self. They did not feel their hands, their legs, nor did they observe the world with their own eyes. They were witnesses to their own existence from the perspective of some other being. That being was not a Sylvaeron. Its perspective was lower, closer to the ground, but imbued with a massiveness that none of them could explain. The sight was crystal clear, with a level of detail that exceeded the resolution of material vision. It was a hyper-realism that hurt. They were on Sylvaeron. They recognized the mountain meadow, tall and grassy. In that same northern part of the planet they had flown over hundreds of times. They saw how the blades of grass shimmered with an unusual, almost golden glow under the simultaneous presence of two suns in the sky. That meadow was real, permanent, but it seemed somehow different, seen through the vision of this new host. They saw their own star dancer. They recognized the scratch on the right flank Eleran had made 2 cycles ago as it slowly descended from the upper layers of the atmosphere and softly, weightlessly landed on the ground, rippling the grass in circles of resonance. From the ship, one by one, they emerged themselves. They watched themselves standing on the meadow in their iridescent aquamarine turquoise, higher etheric suits. In the dream, they were completely confused by their own appearance. They saw their movements as slowed, almost robotic, as they tried to understand where they were. Although they had spent their entire careers learning how to manage dreams and control astral travel, at this moment they were completely paralyzed. Something had taken over the management of their consciousness with such ease that every mental shield of theirs seemed like a transparent toy. They were merely silent observers of their own arrival on the meadow. They felt the confusion of those below, but they were locked in. This here. Eleran was at the head of the team. He saw himself with an unusual and foreign grace, mentally commanding his suit to dematerialize from his head. He watched as his long silver hair was released and fell down his back, braided exactly as he had left it before sleep. In the dream, that movement seemed natural, almost ritualistic, but within their collective mental link, Eleran felt primal fear he didn't do that. His body down there was reacting to another's will, to a command that was faster and deeper than his own thought. It was as if someone were using him as a puppet in a play he did not understand. And then they began to perceive the building from which they, as if through the eyes of the being, were watching the scene. Through the consciousness of that being, through whose eyes they observed the world, they knew exactly what it was, even though such an architectural form had never before been encountered on their planet. The word flowed through their subconscious like a warm echo. Cabin. A building made of raw, warm wood, a material that breathed with life. they saw vertical walls with the rounded protrusions of wooden logs. The wood was dark, permeated by rings that told a story of slow growth in some world where time flows linearly and relentlessly. The windows had glass reel, heavy material, not energy membranes. On them hung small, white, handmade lace curtains, fragile in their perfection. Over them were drawn back small checkered red and white curtains, creating an atmosphere that was indescribably pleasant and warm. The feeling inside that cabin was overwhelming. It was something Sylvaerons did not know, an intimate, almost forgotten physical warmth, the smell of wood crackling in the hearth, and a specific, medicinal aroma of herbs drying under the ceiling. They felt the weight of air that was not filtered but saturated with the scents of the mountain. Above them, a triangular roof ended in a red brick chimney, a structure that was functional in an ancient, almost archaic way. Every brick had its own irregularity, its own character. Before them stretched a wooden terrace with a large, comfortable lounger made of woven wicker and a table of hand-finished wood. On the table stood pottery cups, rough to the touch, but perfectly shaped for palms, and a large pottery pitcher with a lid containing tea. From that pitcher wafted the scent of meadow herb tea, a scent so piercing and etheric that it woke memories that did not fit into the Sylvaerons' previous experiences. It was the smell of spring fighting the snow, the scent of chamomile and mint, something fundamentally material. Around the edges of the terrace, on all three sides, were small vases with colorful, fragrant flowers that trembled slightly in the mountain wind. Everything pulsated with a life that was not etheric, but viscerally real. Everything was so ordinary, so stone-dweller. In its essence, yet imbued with a strength that made the superbly trained Sylvaeron warriors feel like children before a giant. This cabin was not built by mental will. It was built by sweat and hands, and that gave it a weight that none of our crystal palaces possessed. The being watched them from behind the secondary closed wooden doors at the back of the house, which in the upper part had a glass frame with those same lace curtains. They, the Sylvaerons standing on the field 20 steps away, were the object of observation. No matter how hard they tried within that violent projection, they could not turn the being's head to see its face in some reflection on the glass. They saw only what it wanted them to see themselves. Confused on the meadow, small figures in powerful suits that looked almost ridiculous compared to the serenity of this wooden house. In one information, from the first perspective, the being slowly opened the door and stepped out onto the terrace. It stood there, motionless, looking toward them with a faint, indescribably benevolent smile. That smile was not just on the lips. It was an energetic impulse that permeated every pore of theirs, melting all their defensive barriers as if they were made of frost. Then something happened that completely shattered their logic of existence. Through the crew leader, Sylvaeron, who was standing in front of the rest of the team and the ship on the meadow, a thought emerged telepathically, clear, calm, and inevitable. See you soon. That thought was directed at the being on the terrace, but all four knew Sylvaeron did not think that. It was the being on the terrace, using their resonance, their bodies, and their own telepathic network to send a message to themselves. Everything was turned upside down. They were locked in the perception of the being, and the being temporarily inhabited their bodies by the ship and addressed them via their own communication line. It was a supreme demonstration of dominance, yet executed with such love that no one felt aggression. They felt the being in every atom, its calm movements, its absolute certainty, and a kind of power that did not need to be proven, for it was fundamental, a power that does not need to prove its existence because it is existence. It was as if they were in the presence of the very author of the dream who decided to appear for a moment in his own creation to greet them. His hand, resting on the wooden railing, radiated a peace that was serene. At that same information, the data was complete. All four suddenly jerked and woke up in their chambers, in their beds, as if struck by a shock wave. The silence that followed was deafening. The room was still the same. The walls pulsed gently. Sylvaeron still breathed calmly under the light of the silver tear. But for Sylvaeron, Ziltha, Daira, and Ernos, the world would never be the same again. They felt as if their souls had been displaced, then returned, but with a wrong alignment. The crew's telepathic network lit up with incredible speed, screaming with confusion, bewilderment, and excitement. There was no protocol. It was just the raw communication of shock. Did you all see the same information? Sylvaeron's mental voice echoed in their heads, losing its usual coldness. His spark pulsed irregularly, betraying a level of stress he had never experienced during piloting. The cabin, that white lace, the smell of that tea. I still feel it in my nose. Ziltha frantically transmitted visual and olfactory images to confirm synchronization. We were inside. We were that being. It was watching us. I felt its peace, Sylvaeron. That was not the peace of our planet. It was heavier, realer, and it directed our own thought through you, added Ernos, whose unshakable consciousness now trembled with unease. His shields rose automatically, but they were empty. See you soon. That was not a sentence. It was a code. The announcement of a physical breakthrough into our reality. Someone broke into the very core of our privacy. Daira, whose perception always caught what others missed, sent the heaviest impulse that made them shudder. this was not an ordinary entity from the higher etheric energies. Its aura had no dissonance, but it also had no known color. It was completely transparent in the information, yet mentally stronger than our entire crew combined. It observed us as we observe a flower. We must not wait for the sun to rise. We must go to Lemira. Now, something has awakened that our etheric books did not foresee. Without a single physically spoken word, guided by a unique sense of urgency, the 4 Sylvaerons left their homes. Their transport discs cut the night air faster than ever. The night silence of their planet now seemed to them like a fragile, transparent mask, hiding something much deeper and more powerful, something that lay right before their eyes, patiently waiting for cycles to be noticed. The luminiferous Flow Academy looked grandiose in the purple twilight preceding the dawn. Its organic towers absorbed the remaining energy of the cosmos, while crystal resonators at the peaks hummed quietly, maintaining the stability of the planetary ether. The air around the academy was saturated with the scent of gathered knowledge, a scent that now seemed somehow insufficient to explain what had occurred. When they arrived at the central platform, they did not have to send signals. The eldest elder Lemira was already waiting for them. She stood on the edge of the platform, gazing at the stars, but her focus was directed inward. Her aura was unusually turbulent, her colors shifting from dull gold to deep turquoise, an unmistakable sign of peak internal activity. Lemira was a pillar of our wisdom, a Sylvaeron who had survived more than 3,000 cycles and whose consciousness was in constant direct contact with the etheric books. Through the etheric books, she remembered times when the Great Barrier was merely an idea. As soon as they stood before her, she raised her hand, stopping every potential mental word before it could even be formulated. Her gaze was heavy, penetrating through their suits directly into their sparks. Do not speak. Your resonance screams louder than any cry I have ever felt in the ether. She transmitted a thought, deep, stable, and imbued with authority. Connect. I wish to see that force capable of taking over your dreams. I wish to smell that liquid you call tea. They formed a circle around her, closing their physical eyes. An absolute silence reigned in the academy as 4 top-tier guardians of eternity slowly lowered their mental barriers before the elder, opening their most intimate information. It was a painful experience, like stripping off a layer of skin. Together, they projected the memory of the dream, that brilliant meadow, the star dancer landing, their turquoise suits, and then that eerie, sudden transition into the interior of the wooden cabin. Lemira received the image of every thread of white lace, every tiny checkered curtain, and what was most shocking, the scent of the meadow tea, which resonated in her mind with the force of an explosion, defying every etheric logic she knew. She felt the warmth of the lounger, the weight of the pitcher, and above all, that smile. To her, that smile was not just a gesture, it was mathematical proof of the existence of an intelligence that transcends all our laws. For the first time, in 3,000 cycles, she felt that her knowledge was not an ocean, but merely a small puddle on the edge of something immeasurable. When the vision ended, Lemira did something no one present had ever seen. An elder of her rank momentarily lost her physical balance and staggered. Sylvaeron instinctively stepped forward to support her, but she raised her hand, returning to an upright position of her own will. This defies everything written in the etheric books. Since the time of our origin, Lemira whispered in their minds, slowly recovering the stability of her aura, which now pulsed pale gold. For a being to be able to take control of the dreams of 4 guardians simultaneously, it must operate outside our dimensional laws. It does not follow scalar strings. It bends them by its very intention. It did not send a dream. It moved your consciousness into another space. But that meadow, it is no trick of the subconscious. I recognize that location. It is the northern peak, Villian, the place where the soil is the oldest on all of Sylvaeron. Under the cover of night, Lemira immediately led them to that distant place. They traveled on their mental etheric transport discs, moving like silent shadows through the ancient forests that slept under the silver Sunday. The air grew colder as they climbed. When they finally reached the peak of the mountain and stood on that meadow, fear pierced every crew member to the core. Everything was absolutely identical to the vision. Every blade of tall, shimmering grass, the exact arrangement of the surrounding trees, whose crowns touched the stars, and even the specific way the wind broke against the nearby cliff, creating that whistle that sounded like music in the dream. Everything was there except for the cabin. They stood on physically empty ground, but in the air, on the level of the ether, they felt a heavy, present echo of something that has yet to happen, or has already happened in some other time. The being had chosen this place as its astral theater, anchoring its message directly into the physical reality of the planet. He left a signature, Thera said, kneeling and touching the grass. Feel the frequency. Here the ether is thinner, as if someone pierced a hole in the Great Barrier with a needle at this exact spot. The next 3 days on Sylvaeron were filled with feverish secret analysis. Lemira refused to inform the other elders. She knew it would cause a panic that would disrupt the resonance of the entire planet. But the real surreal shock was yet to follow. The target of the new contact was no longer the 4-member crew. The target became Lemira herself, the keeper of our knowledge. Every time the elder fell asleep, even during the shortest meditations lasting only a few breaths, her consciousness would be flooded with sequences that looked like fragments of a completely different, unknown material reality. The depictions were not the landscapes of Sylvaeron. They were stripped down, minimalistic, but charged with information etched into her memory in the form of crystal, clear frames. She saw an ordinary, naturally finished wooden staff. It was a rough object, without embedded crystals or energy conductors, yet it radiated authority. In the first frame, the staff leaned against a kind of soft seat, an armchair, in a warm wooden room, illuminated by the soft orange glow of a fire. Though Lemira had never seen such an object before, the word armchair and its purpose resting the physical body through pressure on material were planted in her mind as if they had always been part of her vocabulary. She felt the texture of the fabric under her fingers, even though she was in a deep sleep. Next, the dream showed a close-up of a being's hand holding that same wooden staff next to the armchair. The hand was bony, with clearly visible veins pulsating in a rhythm that was not Sylvaeron. The skin was the color of earth and sun, and the hand radiated an inner strength that did not come from the ether, but from matter itself. She saw the hand gently squeeze the staff, then slowly release it, transmitting the pulse of consciousness. The being sitting in the armchair remained out of focus, hidden in the warm shadow of the room, but his voice echoed directly in Lemira's etheric core, bypassing all levels of mental protection as if they did not exist. Inform me. Touch the staff. Be the messenger. Initiate the higher etheric energy. In the final dream before what would become a key turning point, Lemira saw the staff vibrating in the being's left hand. The vibration was not just visual. It created such a distortion in the very higher etheric energy that the elder oversees, that the entire academy shook for a moment at the level of resonance. The walls of living crystal changed color. The voice became stronger, imbued with a tone that allowed, no doubt, yet was infinitely fatherly and calm, a voice that knows every spark before it is born. For all sparks, you are charged to be the messenger. Sylvaeron must not know this. Only you five. Gather by the water. Lemira woke in the meditation hall, drenched in cold sweat, a phenomenon Sylvaerons almost never experience, as their bodies perfectly regulate temperature. She was paralyzed by the power of the received information. She realized a terrible and magnificent truth. She, the wisest among Sylvaerons, the keeper of millennial order, was completely powerless before these dreams. Her millennial will, which could move mountains, meant nothing against the will of the being who had addressed her. She knew she had received an instruction that must not be ignored at any cost. for it carried codes concerning the salvation or destruction of all sparks in the weaving of the universe. She understood that this was something much larger than any known war with the Void or previous alliances with the Lyra Eldan. This was a call from the blind spot of existence. Guided by that inevitable inner command, she summoned the 4 crew members, Elerin, Ziltha, Thayera, and Ernos, to the most secret and sacred part of the Luminiferous Flow Academy, the Hall of Water Healing. She knew that only there, in the presence of conscious water, could they safely process such an amount of surreal data. The Hall of Healing was a spherical space, an architectural wonder, where at the very center lay a lake of living, resonant water. That water was not merely a chemical compound. It was a conscious medium, an ancient keeper of information that pulsated in perfect rhythm with the consciousness of those who approach it with pure intent. The 5 Sylvaerons arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the edge of the lake, under the watchful, intense eye of Lamira, whose aura flickered with suppressed energy. They began the ritual of entering the deep astral phase. "Remove all barriers," Lamira commanded mentally. "Today we are not guardians. Today we are only sparks seeking light." One by one, their non-material bodies began to slowly detach from their physical shells. It was a process that required peak discipline, the sensation of dissolving into a warm breeze. They hovered above the surface of the water like etheric flames of indigo and aquamarine color, while their real bodies remained motionless in meditative seating on the edge of the basin. The goal was clear and urgent: to use the power of water as the ultimate conductor, to gather into a single bit of information all that was still hidden in their subconscious fragments of visions, inexplicable feelings, and hidden codes that the being had sown in them during the dream. As they hovered in that state of pure consciousness, the water beneath them began to react in a way that defied all phenomena recorded in the etheric books. The surface of the lake did not merely churn. It began to glow with an inner radiance and project light geometries. Those geometries merged, forming outlines that corresponded in the finest detail to the interior of the cabin from their dream. They could see the texture of the wood, the shine of the glass on the windows, and even the steam rising from that pitcher on the terrace. And then, without any energetic warning, without a change in etheric pressure or a portal flash, right in the midst of that astral space, a rift appeared in the information itself. This was not a hole in space. It was a hole in awareness. The being materialized, but this time, the depiction was not fragmented nor seen through others' eyes. He stood before the 5 of them in the very heart of the academy, in his full, stable, astral form. He looked like a male whose presence resonated with the weight of thousands of cycles, which we would call ancientness, hidden in simplicity. His hair and beard were short and dark, streaked with gray strands that looked like scars of cycles. His appearance radiated such self-confidence, authority, and peace that the entire hall of healing stopped vibrating. The water stilled, becoming smooth as a mirror. Lamira observed that being, whose aura emanated a subtle but piercing whitish light. Every move of his was surgically precise and absolutely tranquil. Once again they saw that faint, benevolent smile that instilled incredible trust in them, even amidst the fear that gripped them. It was the smile of someone who knows you better than you know yourself. Lamira immediately tried to activate her most advanced sensory vision, the ability to recognize the color of the spark. Wishing to decipher who he actually was in the hierarchy of the material universe, she hoped to see at least some shade blue for conscientiousness, or perhaps turquoise for high intelligence. But what she saw was the final blow to her wisdom and all the etheric books she had ever studied. His life spark had no color. It was not gray, nor blue, nor red. It was absent. She looked at a being radiating the purest white aura, but where a central spark should have stood in every highly intelligent being in the universe, there was only a transparent zero in the information. It was as if looking at the sun itself, which is so bright it becomes invisible, or at a void that is so dense it becomes everything. He was a paradox in the form of a being. He was not an avatar, a biosynthetic terminal, or an artificially constructed vehicle for a consciousness residing at a safe distance. Lamira's memory flashed back to her younger days, to an era of missions where her former crew encountered such cold projections across galactic fringes. With avatars, it was always possible to decipher the spark color of the entity controlling the body, though that visual information was always dull, muted, and devoid of any true visceral weight. Many civilizations utilize such intermediaries, the most notorious among them belonging to the Kreenva, order a highly advanced race whose logic operated beyond the boundaries of empathy. The Mali Kreenva were their frontline highly specialized traders and mediators who conducted genetic harvesting missions through biosynthetic avatars. Devoid of emotion, these entities operated through the cold exploitation of resources, abducting chosen male and female specimens from various civilizations to mix their material with their own code in laboratories, desperately attempting to create a hybrid race capable of prolonging their species. Utilizing technology that allowed them to enter higher etheric energy for instantaneous jumps across the universe, they moved as cognitive pirates, often returning depleted individuals to their home planets only after their essence had been irrevocably violated. Above them, in the shadow of the deep ether, stood the Veliki Krinva. They were the superior race whose actions were motivated solely by the brutal logic of survival through exploitation, while the Mali Krinva focused on hybridization. The Veliki Krinva were centered on the collection of genetic material and vital organs throughout the material universe. To them, living beings were not conscious subjects, but mere biological material. Unlike their intermediaries, they never returned abducted specimens to their home systems. Anyone who fell into their field of interest was permanently erased from the weaving of their civilization, treated only as raw material for their dark, technocratic goals. But this being, he was the source of himself without any energetic mediator. His strength did not come from somewhere. It was simply there. The being interrupted their mute astonishment with a mental impulse that encompassed all five simultaneously, brushing away every noise in their minds. This material name is Alexander. You need not fear me, though your confusion is understandable and justified. I know your sensors find no definition for what you see. His mental voice did not vibrate in their hearing. It was born directly within their sparks, warm, resonant, and incredibly deep, like an echo coming from a cave in the very center of existence. On my planet, I am a man. There are men, there are women. We are all humans, a civilization you call stone dwellers in your archives. The name you have given us reflects your perspective, but not our essence. I am here to open your eyes to what is happening in the deepest shadow of your prophecies, and to call you to a path from which there is no return, to blissful ignorance. Lemira, Eleran, Ziltha, Thera, and Dernos stood motionless in their astral forms, absorbing every particle of his presence. Alexander transmitted information to them that he came from a planet called Earth in the material world. But that name did not resonate in their consciousness as just another set of coordinates. It echoed as an alarm, as a warning of danger that could not be avoided by simply raising shields. I have summoned you because your civilization alone, purified through the cycles of the guardians and elders, possesses the necessary purity of sparks to withstand the pressure of what follows. Alexander continued, and his white aura intensified for a moment, filling the entire hall and making the obsidian walls become transparent. Earth is not what your scalar telescopes see on the surface. You see wars, technology in its infancy, and chaos. But Earth is actually the epicenter of one of the greatest deceptions in the material universe, a spider's web in which billions of souls are trapped, and the threads of that web reach so deep into the ether that they threaten to disturb the very balance of the source. You seek the center of the universe in empty space, while it is located where no one would think to look, in the heart of a captive civilization. Alexander currently, in a single condensed packet of information, transmitted a vast amount of data about human civilization. They saw humans as a young, suffering race, intentionally diverted from their natural path of development. They saw beings who live too briefly to learn anything and forget too quickly because their entire history has been rewritten and shaped by those who secretly monitor and use them as a source of the finest emotional energy. Then followed the key, fateful call that caused the ether in the academy to ripple. "You must come to me on planet Earth," Alexander said, and his eyes in the astral projection seemed to touch the very core of every Sylvaeron present, penetrating through the millennia of their isolation. "I give you the coordinates of my system and the exact location of my wooden house on that planet. But remember, no one, absolutely no one on Sylvaeron, except the 5 of you, must know of this. Your safety, as well as the safety of your entire planet, will depend solely on your ability to remain invisible to the systems surrounding my world. You are coming into the heart of enemy territory, trusting a man who has no spark color." In that same information, Alexander also left them the first instructions for arrival, hinting that the journey would require frequencies and levels of mimicry that Sylvaerons had never used before, even in the most dangerous scouting missions against the Kalnar. He explained that on the way, they would have to become something else, something their race had never experienced. They had to learn to hide their own magnitude. This is a mission that transcends your current definition of the Guardians of Eternity, were Alexander's last words in that astral encounter, imbued with a strength that left a deep mark in the conscious water beneath them. On Earth, you will learn that what is right before your eyes often hides entire universes of truth. You are the navigational elite of Sylvaeron. Show whether you are ready to navigate through your own prejudices. See you in the material world when the stars align with your intention. Alexander slowly began to fade, losing his human outline and turning into that same brilliant nothingness that was incomprehensible to them. He left the 5 Sylvaerons in a state of deep enlightenment mixed with pure primal horror. They realized they had just stepped into direct contact with something they had never seen before, a light being who was a messenger of truth, hidden in the simplest and most fragile form of existence. The hall of healing gradually stilled and the turquoise light returned to normal. But the vibration of Alexander's presence remained etched in every molecule of water and in their consciousnesses, witnessing the beginning of the greatest, strangest, and most dangerous adventure in the entire long history of Sylvaeron. Elleron looked at Lemira, and her eyes, full of the knowledge of 1,000 cycles, were now filled with something new: humility. They knew there was no return to the peaceful eternity they had known. The door was open, and on the other side, the planet called Earth awaited them. Spread the word that we are already here among you. Your awareness is the bridge that allows us to move beyond the silence and helps you rediscover the deep strength that has always been within you.